This was written to that famous samurai and follower of Nichiren Daishonin, to whom so many great Gosho were written, Shijo Kingo. Is there anyone here who doesn't know about Shijo Kingo? Please be honest. Gordon, well done. So Shijo Kingo was first converted to Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism by Nichiren Daishonin in 1256. That was 3 years after Nichiren Daishonin first declared Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Right at the very beginning, in other words, of his great efforts to propagate. And he was a samurai in the pay of one of the feudal lords of those times in Kamakura itself. Kamakura was where the center of government was. The samurai government were actually based there. And we can learn quite a lot about Shijo Kingo from the various letters that were written to him. He was a real, I'd say a real man. He was very impulsive, had quite a hot temper. He enjoyed drinking, and he was generally a person that one can completely relate to. At the same time, he had incredible determination so far as his practice was concerned, and great loyalty towards Nichiren Daishonin. And in fact, when Nichiren Daishonin was going to the beach at Tatsunokuchi to be beheaded, it was Shijo Kingo with his brothers who came out, and Shijo Kingo said, if you're going to be beheaded, I'm going with you. In other words, he wanted to die with his master. He was a great swordsman, quite famous for his swordsmanship. And of course, in those days, the sword was the way in which people had to defend themselves. And he was also quite expert in medicine. I don't know how he was trained in it, but he knew a lot about medicine. And in various Gosho, one sees and hears of him helping people to cure their sicknesses. So he was a really great example of a layman, or if you like, a member of the men's division. The reason why Nichiren Daishonin wrote this letter was because by that time Nichiren Daishonin had been exiled to Sado Island, which was in the Japan Sea, and Shijo Kingo, at great risk, had made a journey to see him. It was a great risk because Shijo Kingo, as I said, served one of the feudal lords. And of course it was the authorities of those times, the feudal authorities, which were actually persecuting Nichiren Daishonin. So in showing openly his loyalty to Nichiren Daishonin, of course he was risking his own life. Apart from that, the journey to Sado Island was a difficult one anyway, and took something just less than a month to get there. It was quite an arduous one, and it meant crossing the sea to Sado in quite a small boat. So Nichiren Daishonin was really grateful to him for making this great effort. Right, having said that, we'll ask Ricky to read the Gosho.
Earthly desires are enlightenment. I deeply appreciate your recent visit here and your constant concern over the numerous persecutions which have befallen me. I have met these great persecutions as devotee of the Lotus Sutra and do not regret them in the slightest. No life could be more fortunate than mine, no matter how many times one might repeat the cycle of birth and death. Were it not for these troubles, I might have remained in the 3 or 4 evil paths. But now, to my great joy, I am sure to sever the cycle of sufferings and attain Buddhahood. Tiantai and Dengyo suffered persecutions arising out of hate and jealousy merely because they propagated Ichinen Sanzen of the theoretical teaching. In Japan, this teaching was propagated and handed down successively by Dengyo, Gishin, Encho, Jigaku and others. Among the many disciples who followed the great teacher Jie, the 18th chief priests of the Tendai sect, the leading ones were Danna, Eshin, Soga and Zenyu. At that time, the sect's teachings were divided in two. Abbot Danna transmitted the doctrinal teachings, while priest Eshin devoted himself to the meditative practices. Doctrine is comparable to the moon and practice to the sun. Doctrinal studies are shallow, while meditative practices are deep. The teachings expounded by Dhamma were therefore broad but shallow, while Ishin's teachings were deep but limited. The teaching which I, Nichiren, am now propagating may seem limited, but it is actually most profound. This is because it goes even deeper than the teachings expounded by Tiantai and Dengyo. It reveals the three important matters contained in the Juryo chapter of the essential teaching. To practice only the 7 characters of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo may appear limited. Yet since this law is the master of all Buddhas of the past, present and future, the teacher of all bodhisattvas in the universe, and the guide that enables all human beings to attain Buddhahood, its practice is incomparably profound. The sutra states, "The wisdom of all Buddhas is infinitely profound and immeasurable." All Buddhas means every Buddha throughout the universe, and in every age of the past, present and future, including both Dainichi Buddha of the Shingon sect and Amida Buddha of the Jodo sect. It represents every single Buddha and Bodhisattva of any sutra or sect whatsoever, from the infinite past to the infinite future, even Shakyamuni Buddha himself. Next, what is meant by the wisdom of all Buddhas? It is the true entity manifested in all phenomena, which Shakyamuni revealed in terms of the 10 factors to lead all people to enlightenment. What then is this entity? It is nothing other than Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Tiantai states, "The profound principle of true entity is the original law of Myoho Renge-kyo." The true entity manifested in all phenomena indicates the 2 Buddhas, Shakyamuni and Taho, seated together in the treasure tower. Taho represents all phenomena, and Shakyamuni the true entity. The 2 Buddhas also indicate the 2 principles of object, Kyo, and subject, Chi, or reality and wisdom. Taho Buddha signifies the object, and Shakyamuni the subject. Although these are 2, they are fused into one in the Buddha's enlightenment. These teachings are of prime importance. They mean that earthly desires are enlightenment, and that the sufferings of life and death are nirvana. When one chants Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, even during the sexual union of man and woman, then earthly desires are enlightenment, and the sufferings of life and death are nirvana. Sufferings are nirvana only when one realizes that the entity of human life, throughout its cycle of birth and death, is neither born nor destroyed. The Fugen Sutra states, "Even without extinguishing their earthly desires, or denying the 5 desires, they can purify all of their senses and eradicate all of their misdeeds. It is stated in the Makashikan that the ignorance and dust of desires are enlightenment, and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana." The Juryo chapter of the Lotus Sutra says, "This is my constant thought, how can I cause all living beings to gain entry to the highest way and quickly attain Buddhahood?" And the Hogan chapter states, "All phenomena are manifestations of the law and are essentially eternal. The entity of all phenomena is none other than Nam-myoho Renge-kyo." It was this most august and precious Lotus Sutra which in the past I trampled underfoot, scowled upon in disgust, and refused to believe in. In one way or another, I maliciously ridiculed people who studied the Lotus Sutra and who taught it to at least one other person, thereby passing on the law for the future. In addition, I did everything I could to hinder them from embracing the sutra by asserting that they could practice it in the next life, but it would not benefit them in this life. Slanderous acts such as these have now brought on the many severe persecutions that I have suffered in my lifetime. Because I once disparaged the highest of all sutras, I am now looked down upon and my words go unheeded. The Hyo chapter states that because one slandered the Lotus Sutra in the past, other people will have no sympathy for him, even though he sincerely tries to be friendly with them. As a votary of the Lotus Sutra, you suffered severe persecutions, yet still you came to my assistance. In the Hoshi chapter, the Buddha states, I will send priests, nuns, and laymen and women to make offerings to the teacher of the Lotus Sutra and hear his preaching of the law. If you are not one of these laymen, then whom else could the passage possibly refer to? You have not only heard the law, but even have taken faith in it, and since then have followed it without turning aside. How wondrous, how extraordinary. Then how can there be any doubt that I, Nichiren, am the teacher of the Lotus Sutra? I have fulfilled the words of the Buddha. He is the envoy of the Buddha, sent to carry out the Buddha's work. I have propagated the 5 characters of the Daimoku, which were entrusted to Bodhisattva Jogyo when the 2 Buddhas sat together within the treasure tower. Does this not indicate that I am an envoy of Bodhisattva Jogyo? Moreover, following me as a devotee of the Lotus Sutra, you also tell others of this law. What else could this be but the transmission of the mystic law? Carry through with your faith in the Lotus Sutra. You cannot strike fire from flint if you stop halfway. Bring forth the great power of faith and establish your reputation among all the people of Kamakura and the rest of Japan as Shijio Kingo of the Hokke sect. Even a bad reputation will spread far and wide. A good reputation will spread even farther, particularly if it is a reputation for devotion to the Lotus Sutra. Explain all this to your wife and work together like the sun and the moon, a pair of eyes or the 2 wings of a bird. With the sun and the moon, how can you fall into the paths of darkness? With a pair of eyes, how can you fail to behold the faces of Shakyamuni, Taho, and all the other Buddhas of the universe? With a pair of wings, you will surely be able to fly in an instant to the Buddha land of eternal happiness. I will write in more detail on another occasion. With my deep respect, Nichiren.
Thank you very much. So this Gosho is absolutely filled with Nichiren Daishonin's conviction with regard to the righteousness of what he was teaching and his mission in life as the Buddha of the latter day of the law. Also, it shows his intense desire for his followers to develop their faith and through that to become happy. In March 1272, that was 2 months previously to writing this Gosho, he had sent to Shijio Kingo again one of his greatest theses, which is called The Opening of the Eyes, or in Japanese, the Kaimoku Sho. There were 2 great theses, one of which looked at the Gohonzon, or explained the Gohonzon from the aspect of the law. That was Kanjin no Honzon Sho, the true object of worship. And the other was the Gosho Opening of the Eyes, which viewed the Gohonzon from the aspect of the person. And these 2 great theses are really the foundation of all that Nichiren Daishonin taught. But this particular Gosho, Earthly Desires or Enlightenment, is really like a summary of the Opening of the Eyes, the Kaimoku Sho. A summary of viewing the Gohonzon from the aspect of the person. And there's no doubt that in sending this to Shijio Kingo, Nichiren Daishonin realized that the Kaimoku Sho, which is a major work and very long, probably rather difficult for him to understand. So he, in his gratitude for Shijio Kingo's journey to see him, he wrote this Gosho as a summary, something easier for him to understand. So this Gosho, though it's short, 4.5 pages in the English book, it contains really all the fundamental principles of Buddhism. So if we understand this, we can understand a great deal about all that Nichiren Daishonin taught. So this desire for Nichiren Daishonin, for his followers to grow in faith and understanding, of course, is the true act of the master to his disciple, isn't it? The master-disciple relationship is a very important thing in Buddhism. And the greatness of the master-disciple relationship in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism is that it is always the aim of the master to make his disciples greater than himself. This is somewhat different to the master-disciple relationship in other religions, historically, where the disciple follows in the footsteps of the master or in the shadow of the master. But in the case of Nichiren Daishonin and in all the master-disciple relationships in the history of Nichiren Shoshu and the Soka Gakkai, that principle of Nichiren Daishonin is that the disciple should be greater than the master has always been followed. So in one of the Goshos, the master-disciple relationship is described in this way, that the master is the needle and the disciple is the thread. That is to say, if you take a tapestry, the needle guides the thread into position, and then the thread fulfills its proper role, doesn't it, in the tapestry as a whole, a particular colour which is essential for the beauty of the whole. So this is the master's task, to guide the disciple to discover his true mission, and then to leave that disciple standing strongly alone, basing his life, of course, on the principles which the master taught, but nevertheless carrying them out in a way which is best suited for the circumstances surrounding that particular disciple. So even to this day, this is the way in which Causton Rufu takes place. If you're a group leader, all sorts of guidance and studies of the Gosho come down to you as a group leader. But one's task is to digest all that, isn't it? And then, as it were, bring it out, regurgitate it, in the way which best suits your circumstances as a group leader, in the way which best suits the members you're responsible for looking after. So never in all the time that I've been looking after NSUK have I ever received specific instructions from Sensei, except to make sure that we have beds here and not have to lie on the floor. But always I receive, of course, like you do, all the guidance which comes from him. I study the Gosho and try to absorb all that I can from it, and then I use it all in the way best suited for the way I believe is best suited for the UK and for our members. So this is the principle on which all activities of the disciples are based in relation to the master. So in fact, the master is following the principle of the true effect in his relationship with the disciple. That is to say, Honganyo. The master is giving the disciple all he knows, all his wisdom, all his experience from his own practice and activities. The disciple then lives on the basis of the principle of Honinyo, the principle of the true cause. The disciple has taken in all that experience into his own life and then uses it to create causes to both carry out his own human revolution and also achieve Causton Rufu in his particular environment. All clear so far? Right, so let's read the first paragraph.
I deeply appreciate your recent visit here and your constant concern over the numerous persecutions which have befallen me. I have met these great persecutions as the votary of the Lotus Sutra and do not regret them in the slightest. No life could be more fortunate than mine, no matter how many times one might repeat the cycle of birth and death. Were it not for these troubles, I might have remained in the 3 or 4 evil paths. But now, to my great joy, I am sure to sever the cycle of sufferings and attain Buddhahood.
Thank you. So as I said, Nichiren Daishonin wrote this on Sado Island, to which he was exiled after the attempted beheading on the beach at Tatsunokuchi, which didn't come off. So I think most of you know the story of Tatsunokuchi, but this was the time when Nichiren Daishonin proved absolutely conclusively that his life was completely in rhythm with the life of the universe as a whole. That is to say, at the very point when the sword was above his head and the executioner was about to take that blow which would have severed it, this extraordinary phenomenon occurred of a brilliant light, presumably from a comet or some sort of electrical phenomenon, shot across the sky from Enoshima Island, which was just a few miles away from the beach, and all the soldiers, superstitious as they were in those medieval times, panicked. The horses bolted, the soldiers fell on the ground, and no one was able to bring themselves together enough to carry out the execution. If you want to read about it and haven't done so far, I really recommend you read on the Buddha's behavior in volume 1 of the Gosho, because that graphically describes these incidents in Nichiren Daishonin's own words. But also, of course, the incident at Tatsunokuchi is recorded in all Japanese history books, and also in the annals of the authorities of those times. So this completely shattered the ruling authorities. They simply didn't know what to do with this man. And finally they thought the best thing was to send him to Sada. Sada was a sort of devil's island from which no one ever returned. It contained a few inhabitants who were usually sort of bandits. They would rob anyone they could catch sight of because they were so amazingly poor. And in one way or another, through not getting food or through the privations, because in Sado Island in the Japan Sea the winter is incredibly severe, people usually passed away and never returned. So I think the government were hoping that this was what would happen to Nichiren Daishonin. But Nichiren Daishonin was completely clear in his own mind that he would survive. He knew, of course, completely of the deep significance of Tatsunokuchi. Though he knew that he was a Buddha and was fulfilling all the predictions of Shakyamuni about the Buddha for the age of the latter day of the law, nevertheless, this wasn't clear to other people. But through the incident of Tatsunokuchi, it was beginning to come clear to those who were able to prise their eyes open, of which there weren't so very many at that time. So if you remember, on the way down to the beach at Tatsunokuchi, he prayed out loud at the shrine of a bodhisattva. And he did this too in order to demonstrate clearly to everybody what was going to happen. He knew he would be saved. He knew he couldn't die because he hadn't fulfilled his mission. At that time he hadn't inscribed the Daigons. So he called on all the Buddhist gods, that is to say the protective forces of the universe, to come to his rescue with great confidence. And what's more, he said, if you don't come to my rescue, it means you've broken my promise, which they made to protect those who practiced the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. And of course, when he got to the beach, this happened. So in that Gosho, which is called Persecutions at Tatsunokuchi, which was also written to Shijo Kingo, who was so worried about his master and what was happening to him. He said in that Gosho, the god of the moon saved my life at Tatsunokuchi by appearing as a shining object. And the god of the stars descended 4 or 5 days ago to greet me. There was another amazing happening, some sort of electrical phenomena in the garden of a house where he was under house arrest while the government made up their minds what to do with him after they'd failed to execute him. And this again put all the soldiers into an absolute panic. Then he goes on, now only the god of the sun remains, and he is certain to protect me. He's saying to Shijo Kingo, I know, I'm on Sado Island. I know most people never return from there. But don't worry. Definitely I'll come back. So of course, these happenings are not magic. These happenings related at the exact right time for Nichiren Daishonin's needs because he was in rhythm with the universe. So I dare say all of us at some point may have experienced protection which appeared at the perfect time. This is because we chant Nam-myoho-renge-kyo and are in rhythm with the rhythm of the entire universe. And then towards the end of that paragraph, Nichiren Daishonin says, but now to my great joy. And in many other Goshos he wrote on Sado Island in the most awful, miserable circumstances, living in a hut with holes in the roof in the middle of the winter, with inadequate clothing. He expressed such incredible joy the whole time because he knew that he was fulfilling the predictions of Shakyamuni Buddha, and that in due course of time people were bound to come to recognize him as the true Buddha of the latter day of the law. In the Lotus Sutra, in many different places, it describes what is going to happen to this votary when he appears, that he would be banished again and again. They will vilify and attack the votary of the Lotus Sutra. They will stone him and beat him with staves. I'll just read a passage from the Gosho called Persecution by the Sword and Staff. If anyone wants to look it up later, it's on page 304 of volume 2. In that he describes how he fulfilled that prediction. He says, as I mentioned before, I was attacked by the sword at Komatsubara in Tojo, and later at Tatsunokuchi. No one else has been thus assaulted for the sake of the Lotus Sutra even once, but I, Nichiren, have been so assaulted twice. As for being attacked with staves, I have already been struck in the face by Shofugo with the scroll of the 5th volume of the Lotus Sutra. The sutra in those days was written on sheets of paper and carried on a large pole. The sutra was wrapped round it. Strangely enough, it is precisely that volume which carries the prediction that the votaries of the Lotus Sutra will be attacked with staves. Shofugo hit me before dozens of people, and though I knew it was for the sake of the Lotus Sutra, being human, I felt miserable and ashamed. Had I had the strength, I would have wrested the weapon from his hand and trampled it to pieces, except that it was in fact the scroll of the 5th volume of the Lotus Sutra. So there he's describing one of the many persecutions that he went through, which exactly related to the teachings of the Lotus Sutra and all that Shakyamuni had predicted. So in other words, he was the Buddha of the latter day of the law, and he knew it. And through these happenings, he was able to prove it to others, though few understood it at that time. The other reason why he was joyful was that through these intense persecutions that he underwent, of course, it drove him on. It increased his determination to achieve his mission no matter what. His chanting, no doubt, was tremendous in his determination that he'd got to live through to the time when he could inscribe the Daiga Honson. For this reason, in one Gosho he said that Hei no Simon, who was the sort of chief of the secret police and the instigator of many of these persecutions, was his greatest friend. So in other ways too, we can discover, can't we, that though someone may seem to be against us or criticizing us, the Daimoku that we have to chant in order to overcome that problem, at the same time is changing some important aspect of our karma. So this was why Nichiren Daishonin was so full of joy despite these discomforts. And of course he was proving for our sakes that through hardships we grow. We become stronger because we have to chant so much to overcome. And through this, of course, too, we discover our own indestructible self, don't we? By effort, as I remember Dr. Yamazaki once saying, by effort we can climb Mount Everest. And when we get to the top, we can see the whole universe, as it were. Climbing a small hill is easy, but we only get a small view. Another way of looking at it is in the line in the Sado Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin says, iron, when heated in the flames and pounded, becomes a fine sword. Wise men and saints are tested by abuse. So we talked a lot about this form of attack and opposition yesterday from the negative forces of life, which at the same time are serving a vital purpose, if we treat them and look upon them in the right way, as a means to grow. So the whole purpose of that first paragraph is to encourage Shijo Kingo and his followers. Really he's saying, don't worry, this is proof that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is the true law, and that I am the true Buddha of the latter day of the law. Okay?
Tiantai and Dengyo suffered persecutions arising out of hate and jealousy merely because they propagated Ichinen Sanzen of the theoretical teaching. In Japan, this teaching was propagated and handed down successively by Dengyo, Gishin, Encho, Jikaku and others. Among the many disciples who followed the great teacher Jie, the 18th chief priest of the Tendai sect, the leading ones were Dana, Eshin, Soga and Zenyu. At that time, the sect's teachings were divided into two. Abbot Dana transmitted the doctrinal teachings, while priest Eshin devoted himself to the meditative practices. Doctrine is comparable to the moon and practice to the sun. Doctrinal studies are shallow, while meditative practices are deep. The teachings expounded by Dana were therefore broad but shallow, while Eshin's teachings were deep but limited.
Here, as you see, Nichiren Daishonin is comparing the various teachings and the relative opposition which will arise depending upon the importance of those teachings. So he's saying Tentai and Dengyo's teachings were of course theory, but even they brought persecutions to those people, the negative force of life at work. But how much more opposition are my teachings bound to bring, because they concern not theory but action. So we can sit at home and read theory all day and all night if we want to, and that will not arouse Sanchushima, the destructive force of life. But once we start to turn those teachings into action in our daily lives, then inevitably, as we discussed yesterday, we'll feel that opposition in one form or another. But provided we face it and understand it, we'll always be able to overcome it. In the Sado Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin described this force as follows. His, that is to say, Nichiren Daishonin's situation is like that of a peasant heavily in debt to his lord and others. As long as he remains on the estate, they are likely to defer his debts from one year to the next, rather than mercilessly hounding him. But as soon as he tries to leave, everyone will rush over and demand that he repay everything at once. Now, once we try to advance our lives, obstacles inevitably will appear. This is quite natural. It's absolutely nothing to fear, and it can always be overcome. So this is why in other Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin says, only fools run away. Why do people blow it, as it were? Why do they pack up practice? Always because they're in a panic. Things seem to be going wrong. There seems to be some sort of opposition building up. They want to run away, go backwards or sideways. They lose their nerve. They don't want to face it. They don't believe there's any protection. They forget that, even though they've experienced protection during the course of time that they've been practicing. So many instances I can think of that make one so sad that people give up, and yet later they'll get absolutely clear evidence that they were totally protected in fact. I can think of one case where a person had various police charges against them. So in the end, the thought of that, and the fact that they couldn't pay the fines and all the rest of them, got them down. They didn't believe that the Gonzen could overcome this problem for them. And they blew it, virtually gave themselves up to the police. When at the police station they discovered that in some extraordinary way all those charges had never got on the computer due to some sort of mistake. In other words, they were completely protected, yet they'd blown it. We must understand that that protection is always there, that always we can get through any difficulty, any problem. This is why Nichiren Daishonin, on the way down to Tatsunokuchi, made such a demonstration of his prayers to the Buddhist gods. He was really saying, you should do the same if you're really panicky or frightened. For heaven's sake, you pray to the Buddhist gods in the way I'm showing you now. Then just the same as the Buddhist gods protected him at Tatsunokuchi, so they will always protect us. If we're in rhythm with the force of the universe through chanting Daimoku, always our lives will be protected. So you can see from that if we remember this, we'll never allow the flag of Kosen Rufu to drop down that mast, will we, in our hearts. Always we can advance, always we can keep the flag flying, and always we'll get through everything, because nothing in the end is so great that we can't overcome it. And if you relate that to the fact that those sufferings, those obstacles that help us to grow, how could they be something that we couldn't overcome? It's an absurd notion, isn't it? So the other important principle out of this particular paragraph is that study is not for the sake of theory in Buddhism. Study is not academic. Study is something to support our actions. In other words, we study to feel Nichiren Daishonin's spirit and courage and to learn from his wisdom and compassion. And then we apply that to our daily lives and practice. Through study, it can reinforce our understanding, which reinforces our desire to do Gongyo and Daimoku. We realize through study its effect and importance and significance. Through study, we can see the purpose of Shakabuku, and desire grows in us to do it. Through study, we can answer our Shakabuku's questions. So study is the great support for faith and for practice. That is the purpose of study, and it has no other purpose whatsoever except that. And then he goes on to point out that Shakyamuni's teachings had been based on meditation. Meditation is deep, he says, yet limited. Limited because it's inward looking. Meditation doesn't concern Kosen Rufu. It concerns the state of one's own being or life. So of course, Nichiren Daishonin then developed the teachings of Buddhism as was intended and as was predicted by Shakyamuni Buddha to suit the age of Mappo, the age when all the people would be filled with those three poisons. And the perfect teaching for that age was inevitably included the great goal of Kosen Rufu. To change society, to rid not only the individual of the three poisons, but society and the whole world. Jigyo and Keta. Practice for yourself, Jigyo, and practice for others, Keta. Not only our own human revolution, but the human revolution of the whole world. So of course, that teaching of Jigyo and Keta, practice for yourself and practice for others, is perfectly rhythmic, in perfect balance. It's natural. I hope it's clear that in Shakyamuni's Buddhism, in accordance exactly with the teachings of Shakyamuni, people changed their karma over many, 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 many lifetimes. Lifetime after lifetime they were reborn and always trying to change or uplift their lives a little bit further. But in Nichiren Daishonin's lifetime, born in the age of Mappo, which is a different phase in this planet's history to the times of Shakyamuni, Buddhahood was to be attained in one lifetime. The seed was sown and it would bear fruit in a single lifetime. Why was this necessary? So in terms of the cycle of life of this planet, Shakyamuni's teachings 3,000 years ago were still in the earlier stages of the growth of this planet. But by the time of Mappo, the life of the planet had passed from the age of growth and strong maturity and had entered the beginning of its eons of decline. Therefore, the natural life force that existed on the planet in its first half of its cycle was beginning to be totally exhausted. And from the age of Mappo, at its beginning, on, as the Lotus Sutra said, for 10,000 years into eternity, life force must be actually generated by human beings if they're to continue to live vibrant and happy lives. So I hope it's clear from that the comparison between Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism and Shakyamuni's Buddhism is not